HR hub. So today we'll be talking about resilience and the role of HR, and you'll probably all be quite relieved to hear you won't be hearing much from me because we've got a guest speaker, Will Sambrook from Aikenham. So I think it's fair to say Will's probably been passionate about resilience for long before it became a buzzword. So he's going to be taking us through and starting looking at actually what do we mean by resilience, because it tends to mean different things to different people, before moving on to have a look at the internal and external stressors that can impact our resilience, and then finally hopefully having a look at some solutions to try and help people with resilience. Now I know you've all kind of miss out and want to connect with one another, and unfortunately we can't do that as much in the virtual world, but we do have the chat function that's open, so please do feel free to add chat and raise any comments, questions you have. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Will.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hello everyone. And yes, as you say, Rebecca, this is one of my favourite topics. My background is in individual and organisational behaviour, and resilience has been really sort of probably my favourite topic throughout my career. And in fact, I gave my first talk in Australia as a postgrad in 1995. And I remember we finished off the session by doing a couple of mindfulness techniques, or, well, we didn't even have the word mindfulness then, but we did a couple of techniques on sort of breathing and finding a space. And I think it really sort of scared the bejeebers out of them. You know, what is this madman? But and now the nice thing is, you know, resilience has become mainstream. So, you know, finally I've sort of come of age. But the big thing is, I think we need to start with is to actually sort of look at this word resilience. You know, who wouldn't want to be resilient, to take life and work and everything that it throws at us, and to be untouchable, living our super self, bulletproof, you know, but is that really what it's all about? And whose responsibility is it for me to be resilient in the workplace? Is it mine or my leaders or the organisations? And that's what we really need to look at today. We need to understand as HR professionals what we need to be thinking about when we talk about resilience, and what our role is in helping individuals and organisations within this space. So this is a huge topic, and as we've just got over sort of 45 minutes for this main session, I'm going to be quite targeted in what I talk about. So I'm going to start by sort of looking at this umbrella term of resilience and what we really mean by it. Then I'm going to look at some of the things that test our resilience, both external forces, so we're going to focus on those things in the workplace which test us, and then internal forces. So these are the pressures we actually put upon ourselves. And once we've done that, we're in quite a good position to look at sort of the people in between those two forces and look at some potential solutions. So as I say, I'm going to look at this from very much an HR, and hopefully at the end I can present you with a sort of skeleton strategic HR framework, which hopefully you can use to build your own bespoke strategy for your organisation. So that's the plan. And to make this relevant, we've got some interaction with you as we go through. So we've got a poll in a few minutes, and then we're going to use the chat feature as well to sort of share some ideas together as well. However, throughout there's also the Q&A feature, so do please ask any questions whilst they're sort of fresh in your mind and as we go through. And then Rebecca is going to keep an eye on these, and if there's a sort of convenient segue to put that question to me, then we're going to deal with it there and then. Otherwise, we'll keep those questions to the end, and then we can have a good old natter using the Q&A then. But please do ask questions whilst they're fresh in your mind. That really helps. The other thing to say on the Q&A is anything that we don't cover, or anything that's sort of too big for this session that needs a bit more unpacking, what we're going to do is we're going to collect those questions, and after we've done our sort of 4 sessions around the country, we'll bring those together and put those into an FAQ and send those out to everybody who's been on the call. So let's start with this umbrella term that is resilience. You know, the lovely thing is, it is an umbrella term. It's something that people feel safe talking about, I think. Back in 1995, when we talked about this, it was more a sort of about stress management was the closest word we got to it. And people didn't really like going there. They didn't want to be on a stress management course. That didn't look good. And it felt an uncomfortable word. So really, resilience has attracted a lot of, it's been a bit of a safe space. But the trouble is, that umbrella has been sort of pulled around all over the place, depending on people's viewpoint on this. So somebody who's looking at organizational performance will have a very different view in terms of what resilience means to them as to somebody who's looking at individual performance. Likewise, somebody looking at well-being and mental health will again have a very different view as well. So this is quite difficult for us as HR people because you know, we have to sort of cover all three of those bases. So what I'm going to be doing is trying to sort of find the sweet spot really today. And there's two good reasons for this. A, because we've only got a limited amount of time, but B, I think that the problem is research has shown there is only a small overlap between these three areas. You know, well-being and mental health is a huge area. Individual performance is a huge area. Organizational performance is a huge area. So where resilience finds itself, you know, really we need to is in all of those areas. So we need to sort of target where the sweet spot is, and that's what we're going to look at today. I think the reason for talking about resilience as well is because, I mean, let's face it, you know, the current crisis, COVID, has caused a huge amounts of difficulties for people to try and work through. So there is a real need to talk about resilience. And also I think COVID has made businesses very sympathetic to resilience, and you know, they're very proud of people's responses to the crisis. But I think we've got to be careful because outside of our current circumstances, I see a lot of expectation on HR to sort of solve the resilience problem. Almost the point you kind of hear the expectation of sort of, hey, HR, I've listened to this podcast on resilience. Sound familiar? So I was thinking, you know, maybe we could sort of select some of those really resilient people that seem to be out there. And if that doesn't work, can we send people on a half-day workshop to learn what resilience is? And can we suggest they sort of achieve some grit and some mental toughness and do what resilient people do? And then maybe we could get some mental health first aiders in case people fall over. Again, probably sounding a little bit familiar. Now, none of these things are wrong per se, but we are in danger of looking for unjoined up silver bullet solutions to something which is actually quite a complex issue. Also, I think we're in danger of placing the onus on the individual to sort of do the bouncing back and bounce back from anything that we throw at them. And it's not that simple. We can't just throw people into a battle and then provide a first aid if they get hurt. We've got to make sure that we are more clever than that. So let's see if we can start by finding a useful definition for resilience that we can use as HR professionals when helping our people and our organizations. And to do that, we've got our first bit of interaction. So I hope you're out there. We've got a quick poll for you. And really what I'd like to do is I'd like to find out how your organization refer to this word resilience. So I'd like you to choose up to 2 of the following. So, you know, as sort of a working definition, and what does your organization do in terms of using this word resilience? So is it coping with setbacks? Is it overcoming the bumps in the road? Is it determination in the face of adversity? Is it our ability to manage stress? Is it being comfortable with being uncomfortable? Is it about grit, mental toughness, and the stuff you said we shouldn't talk about? Obviously, they are solutions as well. Or we don't talk about it. You know, we might talk about resilience, but we haven't really got a definition for it. So those are your options. So if you can choose 2 of those, and I'll let Leanne decide when we've got enough of those to share. Okay, and here's the results coming through now. So how does your organisation refer to resilience? So there's a lot here about coping with setbacks, overcoming the bumps on the road, determination in the face of adversity, ability to manage stress, all have sort of quite equal pieces there. But also mental toughness, nobody wants to say that now. And then a few bits about, we don't talk about it. So that's really good. Let's start the conversation then by having a look at some of those definitions and see what we can do about that. So my favorite definition at the moment is by Adam Grant, a psychologist and co-author of Option B. And his quote that I really like is, "Resilience is the strength and speed of our response to adversity." So essentially what he's saying is that it's how we're able to overcome bad things that happen to us, both big and small. And I think this is important because a lot of the literature that's out there, a lot of the podcasts and the TED Talks are all about people facing huge life issues and huge adversity, and how they've overcome them, which are amazing, compelling stories. But sometimes that doesn't really translate to us in the workplace, where we might feel, well, our issues aren't that big, but they're still causing me a lot of strain. So what can I do? What can I learn? So I think that's where we've got to really sort of be careful. So that's where we're going to target it in the workplace. What's the adversity that people are struggling with that we need to help them with? And also, it's about how we persevere or might persevere in the face of some of those struggles. And then last thing as well, I think we often hear about resilience being about bouncing back. But I'd really challenge that. To me, it's more about bouncing forward. So let me explain that. So bouncing back is basically just coming back just as strong and hitting the same problem again and again, in the same way with the same understanding that we had the first time. Bouncing forward is basically learning from things that have happened to us, learning more about ourselves, developing strategies which are going to help us in the future. So it's not just about springing back. It's about how can we make sure that there's a smooth journey towards our future. So we're going to look at some of the things in the workplace that test our resilience, and look at some of the things that as organizations we should be learning from people's adversity, and then seeing if we can develop some solutions and strategies that we can put in place. So let's start with some of the things that test our resilience. I'm actually going to look first at some of the internal forces, so some of the pressures we put on ourselves. Then we can look at some of the external pressures we face. And the biggest adversity we cause ourselves at work, and the biggest drain on our resilience, is the dramas we find ourselves in. And particularly, it's us not understanding that we are co-creators of those dramas. So let's unpick that a bit. So when we're young, we see people as either good or bad, and that can change in a minute. So think of kids when they come home from school talking about someone who yesterday was their best friend and who could do no wrong in the world. And now today they are the worst of the worst, the baddest of the bad. And tomorrow they could be the best person on earth. When we're older, we know that that's not quite the case. The world is much more nuanced than that, and we get to realize that we all have our different halos and horns. Except when we become under pressure as adults, we start to sort of revert to that old basic good or bad view. So there are either baddies causing the problem, there are victims that need to be saved, and then there's us, the superheroes in our own story. And as superheroes, we find ourselves having to save our stakeholders from the bureaucratic ravages of our organization. Or we find ourselves having to protect our team from the complex demands of the business. In short, what we've done is we put on a super cape and are flying in to save the day. And essentially, we are creating a drama that we don't know that we're doing. Now, this not only puts us under huge pressure, but can often lead to wasted effort, it's unsustainable, and it can easily backfire. And I've just got a recent example actually of a manager I've been working with who found himself in exactly this situation. And when it was played back to him, he couldn't believe the dramas he'd actually caused himself. Basically, this was just before lockdown, he and his team were thrown a number of complex issues caused by the sort of COVID situation that needed quite a quick resolution. And he really did put his super cape on and saw the organisation as needing to be saved. And he was so desperate to please that he didn't actually set any expectations of what could be achieved and by when. And everybody would have understood if he'd have said, you know, with the current crisis, this is what you can expect from us. This is when you should probably be prepared to get something back from us, and when not to be. And he also saw his team as not ready to do battle with some of these complex issues. So essentially, he sort of put them in the victim box. And he put on a super cape to try to shield them. But unfortunately, because he took on all these problems himself, he became very overloaded. And then, you know, he got snappy with his team when they asked him to do what they really wanted him to do, which was to lead and give them some of this work to do. In his mind, now they'd become ungrateful villains, and he'd become in turn a problem to them. In the meantime, his boss was starting to ask, you know, what's going on, because the customers were getting concerned how long things were taking, and she was concerned that he was becoming a bottleneck, which he was. Now he felt like the victim, and he felt that everyone was being the ungrateful villains. We've got to think about this. And when I discuss similar sort of superhero tendencies with managers, and they start reflecting on their own behavior and the way they go about things, it really resonates with them. The thing is, we all have to put on a cape every now and again, but on reflection, we do often put on capes more often than we need to. So here's where the second bit of interaction comes in, and I'm going to ask you to use chat. So there are 5 super capes that tend to be the main ones that we put on. And it's not just like a sort of personality questionnaire where, you know, this is your set cape that you go for. That's not the case. We tend to have internal scripts that run, and we tend to find ourselves picking up and putting down capes depending on the situation. But we do tend to have some tendencies about which ones we go to first. So if I just talk through the 5 capes, and then I'm going to ask you in a minute to say which ones you think you put on most often. So the first cape is about must hurry. So this is about, we set deadlines for ourselves, which in reflection were too ambitious. We run from meeting to meeting and fill our diary up full of activity. The second one is around being perfect. So we like things to be 110% perfect when possibly they only need to be 80% perfect. And we set such high standards for ourselves that are probably above what our stakeholders actually expect. Must be strong is about shouldering responsibility and also protecting others. So it's a feeling of having to take all the weight of everybody's problems on our own shoulders. Must please people is exactly that. We like people to be happy. We like to solve people's issues. We don't want to see people unhappy. So that means we can end up putting people's needs before ourselves. We can end up not saying no. We find it hard to say no. And then, you know, we've put a huge amount of stress on ourselves to then trying to live up to those promises. And then the last one is we must find a way. So this is looking at solutions which are quite complex, and if we're not careful, they can turn into quite big, complicated solutions which are really difficult for us to actually be able to muster. And sometimes looking back, those things might have been a bit simpler if we'd have just pushed back a little bit and just sort of challenged and seen what the real issues were, rather than develop a very elaborate solution. So those are the 5 capes that we tend to reach for and we tend to put on. All of them are fantastic characteristics, you know, trying to get things done to the right standard, taking responsibility, trying to make sure we satisfy our stakeholders, trying to find a way through things are fantastic. But unfortunately, we sometimes overplay those and end up in some dramas. So what I'd like you to do is to choose up to 2 of those capes, and you can just put 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 rather than actually the names of them. So in chat, if you can just put either 1 or 2 capes that you tend to reach for more often than the others. And Rebecca's going to keep a look at the tally, and she's just going to give me a bit of a running commentary as they come in.
So we're seeing quite a lot of must hurries and must be perfects as well. I suspect that quite a lot of these, there'll be a few that people feel, but to be honest, it's a fairly even spread. Must find a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. So interestingly, those top 2 that you talked about just there, must hurry and must be perfect. If you look at the research and the literature on this, they're almost polar opposites. And people often say to me, how come, you know, when I've done this sort of more fully, they go, how come I sort of find myself putting on the must hurry cape and the be perfect cape, and when they're meant to be sort of on opposite ends. And I said, well, okay, so if you put those together, what you've got is like this internal debate in your mind as to, you know, I'm trying to get everything done and I'm trying to make it perfect. And I find it really difficult to try and prioritize things. And they go, yeah, that's very much how I feel. So that's, yeah, so these 2 can actually play quite strongly against quite strongly against each other. Likewise, you can put any 2 or 3 of those combinations together if they're very much like you, and you can start thinking about some of the consequences those can cause and some of the dramas they can lead us to. But I say drama, it's really about the pressures they can lead to, the pressures we put ourselves under, which we possibly don't need to.
There's quite, as you say, Will, there's quite a lot of, you don't really think about the conflict between the 2, do you? As you said, 1 and 2, and there's quite a few of the on the chat that are 2 where you can see conflicts arising.
Absolutely, and that's when the extra pressure comes, because it's not just one thing that's causing us a problem, it's actually 2 things going on there. And so we've got this internal pressure in our mind, and we've set you know, a scene which, you know, not even a superhero could cope with, let alone us mere mortals. So I think for me, this is where individual development should be aimed at, because when people understand the pressures they put themselves under and learn strategies to deal with it, then life becomes a little bit easier to manage, and we start being able to become more resilient, even in the face of some quite difficult situations. So, for example, one thing I do with people is to look at really where they're putting their efforts. So there's 5 areas that we could put our efforts into, and I've put these in the sort of the list of effort versus reward. So all of these have similar levels of effort that goes in, but very differing rewards. So visioning is about really sort of understanding where we're going, and looking at our worth and looking at what we're trying to achieve and working towards those goals. The more we do that, the stronger we actually sort of feel, because that's a very positive thing. Planning how to get there and working towards those visions is, again, a very strong thing to do. How we're going to overcome some of the things that are in our way becomes actually a positive thing. The more time we spend coming down this list, looking at sort of the details of things and then worrying about the problems, and then trying to sort of find solutions, which are very much by putting the cape on, the more and more effort we put into things that don't have as much value and don't give us as good a feeling. So it actually pulls down our resilience. So this is what we tend to look at, you know, giving people the strategies to think where they're spending their time, what pressures they're causing for themselves, and then really what they can do to try and build up their resilience and feel like they're in much more control of their situation. And if we don't help people with this type of learning, then I think, you know, that's really when we have to start looking at providing, you know, support for strain. And I think, you know, that is important as well, you know, looking at people's mental health at the moment, looking at EAP systems, so, you know, employee assistance programs are really, really important. But I think, to me, more important almost, or that first piece, is making sure that people actually have the skills to actually be able to manage themselves. That for me is a key. So what about the external forces that test our resilience at work? So these are real events. These aren't things that we're creating for ourselves. These are real things that we're having to face. And let's face it, there is a huge amount at the moment that we are up against. So I'm going to ask for your help again here. So we're going to create a fictitious person. So let's call them Joe. And we're going to pick up some of the things that might be testing Joe's resilience at the moment. So in chat, what I'm going to ask you to do is to give me some things that might be challenging Joe at the moment and really testing Joe's resilience. So I'm going to start you off with a really easy one. So Joe has a really weighty I knew I wouldn't be able to say that. Has a really weighty workload at the moment. So so that's the first thing that Joe might be facing that might be really testing their resilience. So if you can put in chat some other things that might be really testing Joe's resilience at the moment. And if you're stuck for ideas, think about the things that are testing your resilience at the moment. And let's see if we can sort of build up an idea of what Joe might be facing, and then we can start looking at maybe some solutions or ways of dealing with those things. So Rebecca is going to give me those.
Yeah,
I'm just going to quickly write those down.
We've got a few already coming through. Did you want me to read some out, Will?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we've got no support from manager.
Yeah.
Joe's partner has put under notice of redundancy. Working from home, small children or family issues. I suspect that, you know, that's quite a common one at the moment. Lots of questions that Joe doesn't have an immediate answer for. Ever-changing situations in the workplace. Pressures from home with COVID lockdown. That's probably an overlap with the working from home issues earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Joe has a clinically vulnerable spouse, weather or lack of daylight. So Joe finds himself being stuck indoors all day. Okay,
there's some good ones there. So right, so Joe has a heavy workload, has little support from their manager, has some challenges working from home, and has some challenges not only just working from home and actually trying to manage that working from home. They've got some sort of family background which is causing additional pressures for them. Joe doesn't have answers to all the things that are being asked of them. Things keep changing constantly, and they're tired. And exhaustion is a really big one in terms of resilience. That does absolutely pull our resilience down. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at those in a second, but I'm going to give you a sort of filter to look at those issues through, because whilst all of those are huge challenges and a drain on our resilience, they get made better or worse by 5 factors. And this is coming from David Rock's book, Your Brain at Work, and the Neuro Leadership Institute that David runs. And I think these are really good, because basically what they are is they're the 5 things that we as humans tend to scan our surroundings looking for. And essentially what we're looking for is threats to each of these 5 things. And if we identify a threat with the sorts of things we're facing, then it tends to make those things far, far worse and far harder to actually deal with. So the first one there is our status, or I prefer to actually call it our worth. So if our feeling of worth is under threat, then we feel very, very bad. We find that incredibly difficult to deal with. Likewise, if there is a threat to our certainty, that causes us big problems as well. So if we're working from home, we don't feel we've got the right sort of kit around us to actually do our job properly, we can't access the right people, that basically limits our chance of getting success. So our certainty of getting to a good outcome is affected. Likewise, if things keep changing the whole time, that affects our certainty. So we like things to be smooth and structured. So any threat to our certainty is a big problem to us. Likewise, our autonomy is a big thing that we look for. So we can deal with a bigger workload as long as we've got things like autonomy, because that allows us to make decisions about what needs to be done when. When that goes, we feel a massive threat there. Relatedness is about the people we work with. So if we work with people who we feel we can identify with, who we can understand and get along with, it's much more likely that we're going to feel good about our workplace. When that is threatened, that is then a real big problem to us. It really concerns us. And the last one there is fairness. So do I feel fairly treated? Do I feel like I'm being included? Do I feel like I'm being treated as an adult, as a valued employee, or do I feel that is under threat? So each of these 5 things here are the things that we're sort of really looking for. So we can start to see that, some of the things down here. So working from home, we've looked at it a little bit already, but if we as organizations are not attuned to the fact that working from home and not having the right kit, or being thrown into a lockdown situation where we've got little children that need looking after, and we're in a situation that we didn't actually choose for ourselves, and people aren't understanding of that, then we do feel that is a massive threat to our fairness. That is not really fair. So how can we make it so that we show understanding? We make sure that leaders are working with their people to really sort of make sure that they are being sort of looked after and understood from that particular point of view. Likewise, we said no support from the manager. So no support from the manager pulls that right down, but also then affects our worth as well, because if our manager isn't really sort of looking at what we're trying to achieve in terms of outcomes, and is just getting frustrated with the background that surrounds us, then that tends to lead us into a really bad place. Likewise, we've said about sort of Joe not having the answers and working in ever-changing situation. Again, we can see that if we are not helping Joe to find some sort of short-term certainty around some things, then everything becomes a problem. Everything sort of doesn't fit into place. So how do we create some certainty for Joe to actually make sure that that sort of moving landscape isn't really going to massively affect their resilience? And I think some of the solutions to these are really sort of part leadership behavior and part organizational design. So teams that understand their purpose and their contribution to the organization have been shown to be far, far more resilient, because naturally their sense of status and worth is improving. And so it remains robust to some of those things, those challenges that we saw Joe face. Likewise, short cycles of work with a pulse of planning, doing and reviewing, working with others to actually make sure that we understand where we will fit, is an incredibly good way of improving our short-term certainty. So whilst chaos is running around us, we can hold on to a small amount of certainty, and we can agree that and lock that in with ourselves. Likewise, if those teams are more self-organizing and they have a level of decision-making passed down to them, again, research tells us that not only do people become more resilient, they actually become far better performers, individual performers, and organizations that do this tend to be much higher performing organizations as well. So there's some real things we can learn here about devolving decision-making, and it's something that we've been banging on about for a long, long time. And I think it's really now something that we should really take seriously and bring to the fore. So accountability in relation to the end goal. So have we got accountability? So do we know what we're actually meant to be controlling and not controlling? And also, have we got some responsibilities for each other? So if we're able to do that, then obviously that builds our relatedness. And just small things, I'm just going to show you something in a minute, but I'm working with a group at the moment that we get together online 15 minutes every morning as a team, and just literally run through what we're trying to achieve today and how we got on yesterday. And we do that each morning. So everybody just feels connected. It's also a chance to actually say, oh, hang on, we've got some duplication here that we're doing that as well. So let's make sure that we combine and we don't sort of bump into each other on this one. Incredible way of just increasing that relatedness piece. And then fairness, if we're going to improve that, you know, we really need to make sure that we have got performance management systems and managers talking to people in a way which promotes continuous improvement and development in a very sort of no blame culture. So I think what we can do as organizations is see that there's quite a lot that we can do to improve people's resilience to a lot of the challenging situations that they face at the moment in COVID, but also that they face more generally in their working life. And I think that's why Agile has become so popular at the moment. I'm working with the tech division of one of the large supermarket chains, and we're trying to adopt more agile ways of working. We're about 6 months in, and I've seen a huge improvement, not only in the performance of the team, but also in their resilience. And each team has a roadmap which sets out how it contributes to divisional goals. From that backlog, that workload is agreed with stakeholders. So we agree what's a priority and what needs to be worked on first. We then grab the top things of that list and we put those to a sprint. So we decide the time frame in which we're going to try to work towards some solutions against some of those. So some of those might be big projects, but they're broken down into real sort of outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And those sprints can be between 1, 2, and 4 weeks. So what we do at the beginning of those sprints is we have a planning session to make sure that everything's ready for us to tackle. We then make sure that we have 15-minute stand-ups each day, which just really sort of make sure that everybody's on the right track. At the end of that sprint, we meet with our stakeholders, we present them what we've done, we review our progress, and then finally from there, we meet immediately after that and take that feedback on board and actually in a very no blame way say, right, we've listened to our stakeholders, we've learned a huge amount along the way, let's just grab that. What could we learn from this sprint, which is now going to help us in the next sprint? We choose our next bit of backlog then, but we've learned along the way how we can now put in some better actions which are going to lead us towards better stakeholder outcomes, but also looking after ourselves as well. So I think you can see why this is such a popular thing at the moment. And I think there's so much space for Agile. And a lot of people say it can only be done for tech. Yes, it is tech that I'm working at the moment, but I'm working with real sort of engineers. They're looking after big data centers, their wires and engineering and boxes. They're not looking after software. So I think there's a huge amount that can be done here. And I think lastly, I'd say on this one that, you know, I haven't even met this team face to face. So we've been working 6 months together, and we've had a lot of new starters in that time as well. And it's incredible how quickly people can come into this and feel part of something and very quickly know what's expected of them. And if they don't know that in the first sprint, they quickly find out and they're able to look at the reviews we've had so far. They're able to catch up with the retros that we've had and then really start playing a part in the team very, very quickly. So it's a really, really good way to actually overcome some of the barriers that we're facing at the moment. So you'll see that what we've really been looking at is how we can help individuals manage their own internal pressures, and then start to think about how we can actually support people through some organizational efforts as well. And really on those internal forces, we've looked at how people can manage themselves and also, you know, manage some of the strains they're putting themselves under. There's also something more we need to do in that well-being space, and we'll look at that in a second. And then from an organizational point of view, we're really looking at helping make sure that we manage some of the adverse situations that people find themselves in at the moment. So really, I like to think of these as our 3 shields that we've sort of built up through conversation. How can we make sure that we're helping people manage adversity? How can we also make sure that we're helping people manage themselves from those internal pressures? And how do we keep an eye on some of the strain that's going on for people and just keep an eye on that? So for me, if you put that together in terms of an HR strategic response, it looks something like this. to me, at the top, it's really key that as an organisation, we have a very clear vision which explains our purpose, what we're here to try and do, and what we're all about, why we're actually here as an organisation in the first place. From there, we should have some good organisational goals or objectives which explain where people should target their efforts. And then we should have some values which really explain how we expect to work together. And if we haven't got that right at the top, then that's the first thing we need to get right. But I think once we have, then we've got to try and make those things real at every level and every place in the organisation. And I think we've got to stop thinking about sort of levels maybe and actually start thinking more about teams, a network of teams. Are these things being made real in those teams? Are they given help to make sure those things are real in those teams? So I think one of the key things for me to start with is there's something here around organizational design. So, for example, helping organizations get to the point where they have got self-organizing teams, maybe adopting agile ways of working, and essentially also having a pastoral support network as well. So we're making sure that the support is getting to the right people and is being picked up in the right way. Teams are a very, very good way of identifying some of the issues and also just sort of keeping an eye on things. Then I think we've got HR policies and practices, and I think these need to be doing two things really. So I think the first thing is we need to be making sure that we're having continuous feedback that is about improvement and development. So our performance management system has to really make sure that is happening. Then I think there's also some things we need to think about in terms of that fairness element that we saw in David Rock's 5 threats there. So we need to make sure that diversity and inclusion is not just something that we put in there, it's that we live every day. Flexible working has got to be far better understood by us in terms of what people's experience of flexible working are. And I think one thing I've seen with another client I'm working with at the moment is how they've tackled this. And it's not perfect, but I think it's a really good idea. Is what they've done is they've created personas like we have with Joe, but real personas. So they've taken some groups of people within the organization and saying, okay, for this group of people, this teams, whatever they might be, who are the types of people who are in those groups, and what is it they're facing at the moment? And what they've come up with is sort of a number of scenarios, if you like, of real people in their organizations and what they're facing. And then they've tried to look at any trends, anything that they can see these people facing, and think about then the solutions from there. So rather than just a blanket, this is what we think we should do as an organization, they're really sort of tucked down into, what's actually happening for our people, and let's develop some solutions from there rather than the other way around. Then there's also, I think, bullying and harassment, whistleblowing, other things that make sure that there is a good amount of fairness within the organisation. Leadership behaviour we've touched on, but to me, getting managers and leaders to be very aware of people's situations and what people need at that moment in time. Do they need more directing? Do they need more coaching? What support is it that people need at the moment? And if I'm putting more emphasis into the team being able to manage things, maybe I can step back a little bit and actually just make sure that I'm able to lead the team, because that's probably really what they're needing from me at the moment, rather than getting stuck into places that I'm not needed. So that needs some emotional intelligence. Agile leadership might be another way, but these are the key 3 things for me in bold. And then lastly, I think we've got our personal and team development, which is really key to me. So resilience training. But if we're going to do resilience training, let's really make it targeted towards the sorts of things that people can actually do to help themselves. So we looked at a couple of things around cape management. That's a fantastic area for people to look at. Where do they get themselves in trouble, and what strategies can they learn to focus on the right things in the right way? Team working is key for me. So we use quite a lot of psychometrics to get the team to understand each other better. And like I say, we use agile practices to try and get the team working more effectively together on this plan, do and review basis. Holds the team very much more strongly together. Then I think there is mental health first aid and EAP systems can really make sure that we are providing that pastoral support there. So I think there's a big link, and needs to be a big link between those two. So hopefully that's useful. That's a framework for a skeleton framework, but something hopefully you can sort of look at and use for your own organisations to develop your own sort of bespoke strategy. I've warbled for quite a long time. I think Rebecca's been picking up some Q&As as we've been going through. So just a chance to reflect, and whilst she's asking those questions that we've already picked up, that gives a few minutes for people to also write in their own questions as well.
Yeah, and please do feel free to put in any questions, comments that you want. I suppose one question we've had, Will, is in terms of currently, there's a lot of changes outside in the wider world, a sense of almost borderline chaos at times. So how do you help teams get a sense of order when actually the world around them keeps shifting? How can you help them with that?
Yeah, and I think that came through on this Joe piece as well, isn't it? Joe doesn't have the answers. There's an ever-changing situation, and how do you get sort of any sort of form of control when that's happening? So one thing I've been doing with a couple of teams at the moment who are particularly struggling in this area is we've literally gone on a virtual board. So we're using Miro, great tool, by the way, if anybody wants to look into it. So on Miro, it's like a whiteboard on steroids. It's got all sorts of things you can do, stickies and post-its and all sorts of stuff. And we've done two columns. And the first column on the left is a column which basically says what's in our control. And the second column is what's outside of our control. And we've looked, obviously, to start with at what's in our control, and then we've looked at how our responses should be. And we've done this piece about sort of, not putting on the capes. Let's look seriously about, what we can do to manage those things that are in our control. And who do we need to talk to? So what stakeholders do we need to manage along the way? We've then looked at the other column and said, okay, the fact that these are out of our control doesn't mean that we don't have any influence on them, or don't have any say, or don't need to have a say. So what we've then gone through the things that are outside of our control, and we've looked at how we might influence those things, or who we need to talk to understand those things a little bit more, and think about what control we might have over small elements of that. And that's really sort of been a really good thing for teams to do, because it just makes the landscape, which is ever shifting, just sort of feel a little bit more manageable.
Yeah, no, that makes it. We've had another question of once we have identified what our employees need to be resilient, can you recommend approaches to training and support or providers of resilience training?
The main thing for me is if we come back a slide. So I think there's three elements here, and I think it's important to know what you want from your resilience training. So is it about helping people to manage adversity, and teams manage adversity? Is it about helping people manage themselves? So some of that CAPE management piece, but also there might be some broader bits about, literally looking after yourself. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you exercising? Doing some work around that area, which is not as trite as I've just made it sound. Is a really, really important area. It's those simple things that people do to not look after themselves. There's some big things we can do to turn around that. And then I think the other thing is, are you helping people to manage strain, or are you looking at systems that can be put in place to help people manage strain or look after each other if they are finding strain? So things like mental health first aid. So I think it's really important to start with to understand which of those you're trying to cover, because they're quite big and meaty things in themselves. So I think that's my first thing on there. So and feel free to drop me a line afterwards. We'll put on my email afterwards. I can give you some good pointers in each of those 3 places.
Brilliant. We've obviously, I've had loads of questions around furlough over the last few months, but now people are facing the issue of people coming back from furlough, and how do leaders manage that and help people with the complex issues that arise with that?
The best place to answer that then is probably here. So if you can imagine somebody coming back from furlough, a number of these things are going to be sort of, high alert for them. They're wondering about their worth. They're wondering whether they've actually sort of got a job that they're really coming back to, or whether they're going to be put on furlough again, or going to be in the next round of redundancies. That they don't know probably now where they fit, and they're probably feeling maybe a little bit disgruntled about having to go on to furlough in the first place. I don't know, but so I think it's really important for their leaders to really sort of talk to them about how they're actually feeling at this moment, and then really start to think about how we can develop some solutions for that person. What can they do for themselves, but also then what do I need to be doing as a leader and manager to make sure that I'm supporting them here? How can I make sure that I'm getting them to fit back into the team and find their accountabilities and responsibilities, and how can I make sure they fit within that team quickly and effectively? How can I give them a sense of worth? So how can we do some visioning around really what outcomes they should be generating, and also make sure that we're giving them some really good feedback on how they're achieving those outcomes. So to me, this is a really good place to look when somebody's coming back from furlough.
And I think, it was a thought that crossed my mind as you were speaking, Will, but it's related to another question we've had. It's not just the people coming back from furlough, but actually the potential tensions of the people who've been working throughout, and someone's now coming back from arguably some people may view as a holiday, and dealing with those tensions in the team as well. I can imagine that needs some management as well.
Absolutely, yeah, totally agree. It is a whole team thing, I think.
And then you said, and linking into that, about helping teams to work together more closely. How do you think is the best way to achieve that?
So I think that's this sort of one over here, how this team working piece. So I think a couple of things for me, and they're very linked really. So the first one is, like I said, we do use psychometrics, so insights or other ones, MBTI, to help people just identify how each of the people in the team work in terms of how they process things and how they communicate things. And I think that is really, really useful for people to understand where each other are coming from. And also you can use that as well to then sort of set some sort of guidelines for the team around sort of how we manage our meetings, how we do things, how we learn from feedback, and how we need to present problems and work out solutions together as well. So I think that's really useful. So that psychometric piece I think is really, really valuable. The other thing I think really works, and it's like I say, it's linked, is looking at the vision, objectives and values for the team. Seeing how we fit against the divisional goals, seeing how we want to be working together, and building from the values of the organisation, which is really, there's a couple of exercises you can do around that which are really, really important, because then they're not just going off on their own way, they do feel very linked back to the organisation. So that's the key bit for me.
Brilliant. Well, that's been really, really interesting, Will. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure it's given us a lot to think about and take away, and hopefully everyone enjoyed that. If you've got any questions following this, obviously please do send them over to Will or myself. We'll make sure the appropriate people answer, and we will be having a feedback will flash up once the webinar's closed. Please do complete that, because it is really useful for us to get some constructive feedback about things we should be doing differently, or if it's great. Also, also we have, if it is relevant to you, we've got Alex Russell has got a webinar on the 1st of December, Tuesday 1st of December, about the new immigration regime. So if that is relevant to you, that's a must for your diary. But I think that's everything from us. So thank you again, Will. And hopefully we'll soon get to see you in person at some point. But if not, please do keep fielding through the comments and the questions.
And thank you, everyone. Fantastic. And email is down there for any other questions that you might want to have outside of this conversation.